When working on a project, particularly on a large scale, there's no surefire way to tell if it's going to be a smash hit. You can try your best, but no amount of QA testing will give a guarantee on public opinion when the masses get their hands on whatever you're making. So, you can imagine the feeling at Bethesda Game Studios when they released Oblivion to overwhelming praise from critics and fans alike back in 2006. When each entry in your flagship series has seen more success, recognition, and profitability than the one before it, the mounting pressure for each subsequent release must be enormous. So, when Oblivion average review scores in the low to mid 90s and we're able to sell over 3 million copies within a year, roughly a quarter of the time it took Morrowind to reach a similar number, the thought from the team at Bethesda could only be one thing: where in the world do we go from here? While undoubtedly popular, it would be difficult to call the Elder Scrolls series entirely mainstream back in the early and mid 2000s. It was brand new territory for Bethesda when they started work on the first entry in the series. They had previously released 10 products unrelated to their new endeavour, mainly sports simulators and licensed Terminator games of all things, and they had no idea that their new series would still be going strong nearly 25 years later, and be considered one of the greatest in gaming history. With the numerous successes leading up to the release of Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls name had become more and more established in the minds of gamers around the world, and the popularity of the home console market helped see the latest entry in Oblivion get in the hands of more gamers than ever before, with estimated sales numbers nearing 10 million in 2011. So, when the time came to announce a new game in the series, a huge fanbase was already there, eagerly awaiting its unveiling. After being revealed at the 2010 Spike Video Game Awards, Skyrim was released a month before Christmas in November of 2011, and was put to market on the PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. The grueling wait endured by Elder Scrolls fans around the world had finally come to an end, and it was time to dive back into Tamriel once more. If you're a gamer and you somehow haven't played Skyrim on one of its many platforms it's released on, then frankly, you're missing out. Jumping into Skyrim, its gameplay will feel immediately familiar to anyone who's played an Elder Scrolls game in the past. After a brief tutorial and dungeon section where you create your character and learn the ropes, the game sets you free in the world with nothing but the gear you scavenged, a map heading, and a sense of adventure to guide your way. The upgraded graphics are immediately noticeable, and to be perfectly honest, taking your first steps in its sun-laden landscape still gives me chills to this day. While Oblivion's opening instills a sense of relief and calmness after leaving the sewers, Skyrim's gives you a sense of wonder more than I've experienced in any game, with the use of its palatial music and towering scenery. Once you've got this far, you might be wondering to yourself why you haven't chosen your skills, class, or star sign yet. Well, unlike Oblivion, all of these stats are now determined through gameplay, rather than just picking them through a menu. As described in Skyrim's marketing tour, if you want to do something, you just do it, and it's a statement that still holds true. If you want to get better at, say, destruction magic, just equip a spell and start using it. Your skill will increase in it just like any other. While the system is intuitive and makes sense in terms of the gameplay, personally I feel it removes some of the replayability and choice of starting a new game without as many initial choices for your character. By the time you're a few hours in, you will have seen various towns and cities in the world, as well as encountered a plethora of races that inhabit it. Skyrim's characters feel more alive than ever before, mainly due to their designs and the fact that time doesn't freeze whenever you're having a conversation with one of them, something that Bethesda smartly changed since the release of Oblivion. Factions also return from past games, and most of what you'd expect are there, such as the new Mages College of Winterhold, Thieves Guild, and Dark Brotherhood, which are as much of a standout here as they were in Oblivion. A difference is that the Fighters Guild is also absent, replaced by a similar but less formal group called the Companions, some of whom are also werewolves. Each faction's story is well made and in my opinion provide more engagement and endurable quests than the main story, which, similar to Oblivion again, is serviceable but it's nothing spectacular. It's a good way to learn some lore and unlock a lot of the dragon shouts, but the core of the quality narrative experiences are definitely found elsewhere. While there are too many changes from past games to count in this video, the moment-to-moment gameplay feels a lot better, and the implementation of a dual wielding system is one of the best additions to the game in a long time. Little things like the addition of caravans for fast travelling the world are a nice touch if you'd rather keep your fast travel in-game and outside of going through menus, and the environment itself just feels more alive due to highly detailed wildlife, dynamically changing weather systems, and the chance of encountering wild dragons that will just attack you at any point of the game, whether that's when you're just randomly exploring the world or stealthily trying to sneak through a challenging Dark Brotherhood mission and ruining the whole thing. While the encounters are spectacular the first few times and the rewards are definitely worth the trouble of going through it, the fights do get somewhat dry after a while as they largely play through the same each time. All things considered, Skyrim's gameplay is a great improvement over previous entries in the series and it feels the best it ever has. While some people say it's been overly simplified compared to other games, and in some areas like the removal of class creation it has been, it's not enough to avoid all the positive changes added. Even now I can still find new experiences in the game that I haven't done before, which is something I can really say for a game that I first played over 7 years ago. As we've come to expect, Skyrim's audio is as good as any game in the series, and in some cases it sees some great improvements, mainly in the voice acting and sound effects departments. Starting with voices, Skyrim has a much larger repertoire of different actors than Oblivion, which mostly eliminates the issue of many races sounding exactly the same, though there's still a few that remain but to a lot lesser of an extent. And the quality is very solid as well, with a great selection of voices ranging from gruff Nordsmen to reserved High Elves. The new dragon language also sounds great, whether it's been spoken from the dragons themselves or the player in the form of Skyrim shouts, which sound appropriately imposing. The quality is in large part due to the high level of variation between each shout and the production values employed when recording them. Plus, they're all made using a language created specifically for the series, which is impressive in its own right. With the new technology available to them at the time of development, it also allowed the game's more general sound effects to be of a lot higher quality, with things like drawing swords and flinging spells sounding a lot more engaging and immersive. As people have come to expect from the Elder Scrolls series, Skyrim packs a top quality soundtrack that complements its world without being overbearing. Jeremy Soule returned to compose the score as he had done for both Morrowind and Oblivion before it, and it's a great mix of grand, calming and heart-pounding music, and it's used to great effect depending on your current actions inside the game. The use of a 30-man choir, which was layered 3 times for an effective 90 voices, also works wonders as a backdrop to awe-inspiring set pieces and dramatic dragon encounters. Just like Oblivion, the score works with the games and its locations, not against them. You'll be exploring the beautifully detailed world with the company of an equally gorgeous and calming tune at your back, and it makes for some quality gameplay that you can really get immersed in. Skyrim's soundtrack differs enough from previous games and truly feels like its own thing, while feeling similar enough to make players feel the same level of immersion that they have for years when playing an Elder Scrolls game. It's a truly great score and it has a ton of variety, and it's something that I'll never not appreciate in a game like this. The core of Skyrim's difficulty was changed from the way Oblivion handled it back in 2006. In that game, enemies would scale with you as you level, which meant for a more balanced experience overall as you played, but it also meant that if a bandit was a challenge at level 1, he's still going to be a challenge at level 20 and you'll just have a lot better gear. But the overall scope of challenges were somewhat more limited than you might expect. With Skyrim, there's less enemies leveling with you and more difficulty variety. A similar bandit that may have been a challenge at level 1 will be eviscerated by you at level 20, which makes more sense in the context of the game as your character grows. But on the other hand, a high difficulty enemy like giants or ice trolls will be near impossible to beat at the start of the game, and you'll need to try fighting them once you're a bit stronger. This is all roughly normalised at the game's standard difficulty level, and adjusting that will do the same to your hostile encounters in the world. It's difficult to discuss Skyrim's UI without encountering the argument that the series has been catering too much for the console market. With large text, big icons, and an extremely controller-friendly layout, it's not hard to tell that the menus have been made with them in mind. And similar to Oblivion, but to more of an extent in this case, it looks great on a TV, but not so much when the monitor is right in front of you. Of course it is serviceable on the PC and works well enough, but if this kind of stuff annoys you, then it's hard to not notice when you're playing Skyrim. The discussion of the Elder Scrolls becoming more and more made for the console market ties in well with complaints from some that the series is becoming too simple or overly casual with each release. And while I don't fully agree with those sentiments, as each release adds a lot more features that weren't seen in earlier games, there's definitely some merit to the criticism. Things like creating spells and classes from Oblivion are gone, and while they're not huge losses in their own right, it is a shame to see them missing here. Similar to previous Elder Scrolls games, Skyrim received a few decently sized DLC expansions in the year or so after it was released. The first was Dawnguard, which was initially added to the game in the month of June 2012 for about $20. It added over 20 new quests and was focused on the fight between the Dawnguard and the vampires they hunted. As the player, you were given the option to fight on either side and subsequently become a vampire if you so chose. There were also 2 new skill trees added, as well as various weapons, enemies and new shouts. It got generally positive reviews, often being compared to Oblivion's latest DLC pack, which was the Shivering Isles, with the common consensus being that there's not as much as that expansion offered, but it was a lot cheaper, so it did make up for it. Up next a few months later was Hearthfire, a smaller pack that added the ability to buy and build your own home, along with customizing the interior and also adopting children to live there. While not overly ambitious or game changing, the pack was cheap and it did add some worthwhile content to the game. Overall, it was received to a mixed response, with some people seeing it as a waste of time and not being very creative, while others enjoyed what it added for its low price. It's worth mentioning that on the PC there were mods available that did a similar thing around the same time, and it was for free compared to the official paid add-on, which probably contributed to some of the negative review scores around it. Skyrim's last expansion came in the form of Dragonborn at the end of 2012. The largest of the bunch, it added a new location, as well as the requisite new enemy types, weapons, armor, and new shouts. The plot involves the player finding the means to stop a powerful enemy, and being based around a new location, there's a multitude of side quests to engage with from the various NPCs around the island, and can be done in any manner chosen by the player. A notable thing that Dragonborn added was the ability to tame and ride dragons, something many a Skyrim player had been wanting since its initial release, myself included. As the game's last official content expansion, it received positive reception and it was a great send-off to a game so many people had been invested in for over a year now. And while not an expansion pack, the release of the Skyrim Special Edition in late 2016 could be construed as new content, as it remastered the game and all its DLC with new graphics and a 64-bit engine for PC, as well as releasing it on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Also added was the Creation Club, where people could pay for officially sanctioned community mods by Bethesda, for better or worse. In the end, the Special Edition was generally well received, especially on the new consoles it released on. For users on PC, it did improve the base game. It was given for free for anyone on Steam who owned the game and its DLC though, which was a nice touch. And by the end of 2016, Skyrim's reach had gone far and wide, extended to nearly all of the most common consoles in people's homes. And with the recent releases for various virtual reality platforms as well as Nintendo Switch, it seems like its ongoing relevance won't be going away anytime soon. It's become a bit of a joke in the past couple of years about Bethesda's constant releases of Skyrim to more and more platforms, and it's understandable why. Most games have their time, they're made on whatever consoles are current, and then they're done. But for a game that's nearly 7 years old now, it's still talked about a lot, and it's tough not to see an article or video about it for very long. Hell, you're watching this video right now. Some criticise Bethesda for porting Skyrim to every platform under the sun, but as Todd Howard hilariously and rightly said in an interview recently, if you want us to stop releasing it, stop buying it. It's tough to say if Bethesda games would have such a long lifespan if it weren't for the existence of mods. Even though each release has been decently supported by Bethesda through multiple DLC packs, add-ons and patches, the existence of everything from unofficial fixes, graphics updates and full content expansions help to keep the game fresh for even the most seasoned adventurer. And it only gets better with time, and more people release quality content to enrich the experience. Some of the most impressive mods like Beyond Skyrim, Enderroll and Cutting Room Floor were only released in the past 2 or 3 years. However, there are still massive projects going on to this day, such as the remakes of Morrowind and Oblivion in the Skyrim engine, something that will be truly incredible and I really hope to see finished. Similar to Oblivion, the number of mods is overwhelming, with the number of pages on ModDB for the game nearing 3,000. When looking to mod your own game, it's best to decide beforehand what you want to achieve. Are you looking for a totally new experience, or just changes to the core mechanics of the base game? Do you want more spells or weapons, or just nicer graphics? It can be easy to get overwhelmed with the amount of options available, so if you'd rather just download anything that looks good, be prepared for a bit of troubleshooting to get them all working together. A positive change with the release of the remastered special edition of the game was moving it to a 64-bit engine, which proved to be more stable with a high number of mods. Great news for people who really like to load them up. Initially when it was released, mods had to be ported to the new version, which saw quite a few people actually stay with the initial release as their favourite mods weren't yet available on the new software. Luckily, at this point in time, most mods that were going to be moved have been already, and most of the new ones that will be releasing should be coming out for either the remaster or both, which makes it easier for people who want to get in on the best version of the game. Also, because if you're on Steam, it's basically impossible to buy the original release without a product key from outside it. As expected, Skyrim's mod scene is bristling with things that change up the game, whether that be tiny additions or massive game-sweeping alterations. And like most Bethesda games, I can't imagine it will stop getting releases from dedicated members of the community for some time yet. While some people do joke about Bethesda games, whether that's about their often buggy release quality or the sometimes cocky but always charming nature of their leading man Todd Howard, something has to be said for their dedication to the single player experience. So many companies nowadays just give a half-assed attempt at single player, or just forgo it entirely like the upcoming Call of Duty Black Ops 4. Quality single player experiences can sometimes be hard to find nowadays, but it always seems Bethesda is there either producing one of their own or publishing someone else's. Some of the best solo experiences in the past few years can be traced back to Bethesda, whether that's their own Fallout 4 or the published Doom, Wolfenstein or Prey. And while they do have multiplayer included a lot of the time, you can tell the focus was on the single player. And while not my favourite in the series, Oblivion definitely still holds the crown even though it shows its age a lot worse than other games. Skyrim is a glowing achievement for both Bethesda and single player games as a whole. Having a game still be so relevant after its release is rarely seen in an industry that's so fast moving as ours. And while some of that can be for sure attributed to its multiple re-releases on different platforms, the quality of the game is something that can't be overlooked. From its snowy mountain peaks to pristine rivers below, adventuring through Skyrim is still a joy for even the most seasoned veterans of the Elder Scrolls, and the stories it offers are just as engaging as they were back in 2011. And so, it's with positivity that I look back and see Skyrim as a great entry in the Elder Scrolls franchise, and gladly not the last. With Bethesda's recent announcement of the Elder Scrolls 6, it looks like this series will be with us for a wee while yet, and the quality we can expect from a true single-player adventure will be appearing on our consoles and our computers once again, not too far off on the horizon. Thanks for watching.